guys, welcome back to Hieroglyphs 101, and this is lesson 2. So if you haven't seen the first one, don't forget to go check that out first. Otherwise, this isn't going to make a lot of sense. If you're new here, I'm Kelsey. I'm the creator of Bite-Sized Ancient History and a recent graduate of Cambridge University, where I studied Egyptology at master's level. If you just have a passion for Egyptology, or you're a student, or you just want to show off in museums when you see hieroglyphs, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of my other content. If you're just generally interested in the ancient world as well, I recommend that you go check out my other social media platforms. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about the verbal statement of fact in detail and the non-verbal statement of fact. So we touched on this slightly at the end of the last lesson. And I also gave you a challenge to translate. Did you get it? So the translation is the man speaks to Ra. How did we get this answer for those of you that didn't quite get there? So we have iu, our particle. We then have jed, our verb, as we've seen before. We then have our subject, s, man. Our preposition in our adverbial modifier is n, meaning to. And then the god Ra is the indirect object. The man speaks to Ra. Let's talk a little bit more about our verbal statement of fact in depth. So we've outlined the basic sentence structure, and I want to add one more element, because so far the examples we've looked at have been very simple examples where the verb hasn't actually taken an object. When the verb takes an object, or what we would call the direct object, it takes this place within the sentence structure. So it goes particle, verb, subject, direct object, and adverbial modifier. What is a direct object? The direct object is simply the object of the verb. It is almost the victim of its actions. For example, if I said I kicked a ball, the ball would be the direct object while the action is kicking, and I am the subject. So I said I was going to go into a little bit more detail on the adverbial modifier, because this is not a standard phrase, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of you haven't heard of it as a term. So an adverbial modifier can be a few things. First of all, it can be an indirect object. If you haven't studied languages before, the concept of an indirect object may not be familiar to you. So I'm going to break down a simple English example. The boy gives the ball to the girl. In this sentence, the boy is the subject, whilst the ball is the direct object, as it is being directly affected by his actions. The girl is the indirect object. She is being indirectly affected. So these indirect objects go into our adverbial modifier position. Let's get more used to looking at these hieroglyphs. Let's give you some ancient Egyptian examples. In this sentence, we see an indirect object being used, but let's break the sentence down again. We have iu, our particle, starting this verbal statement of fact. We have our verb jed, which you've seen a couple of times now, so do you remember what it means? It means speak. We have a subject. This is a new one we haven't seen before. This is necha, meaning priest. We then have our direct object, and this comes before the indirect object in these sentences. And this is our pen, or spell. We then have the preposition en, and then the noun sesh, so to the scribe. How does this go together? The priest says the spell to the scribe. Our scribe being the indirect object, while the spell is the direct object. Adverbs, unsurprisingly. What are adverbs? Adverbs are the thing that describe how something is done. For example, he walked casually, he walked quickly, he ran slowly. These are all adverbs describing the way in which an action is done. An adverb might be a word like im, meaning there or therein, describing our main subject and action. You can also have something very similar called an adverbial phrase, and this functions much in the same way as an adverb. However, instead of being one word to describe it, it is a group of words. For example, the adverb might be silently, but the adverbial phrase might be in silence. It's just an extended version where it's still explaining what's happening with our subject and the verb. In Egyptian, an adverbial phrase might be em wahem, and this simply means again. An adverbial modifier might also then be something called a prepositional phrase. So this is anything where a preposition precedes another word. What are prepositions? Prepositions are these little bite-sized words, and I think the best way to exemplify it is to just give you a few examples. In, on, with, by, anything like this setting up a phrase. A prepositional phrase might be something like em het, meaning after. The adverbial modifier may also be something called a subordinate clause. And I'm going to talk about this at the end of the video, once we've talked a little bit about our non-verbal statement of facts. So in our last lesson, we started to talk about the verbal statement of fact. Today, we're going to be talking about its cousin, the non-verbal statement of fact. And I'm pleased to tell you it's very simple and very similar. Quite literally, the non-verbal statement of fact really only differs in the fact that it is non-verbal, i.e. we don't have that verb. So instead, our sentence structure is the particle, most commonly you, our subject, the noun, and then our adverbial modifier, or some people will also call it an adverbial comment. Let's give you an example of a non-verbal statement of fact. Here we have eu, s, m, per. Eu, our particle again, s, our subject meaning man, m meaning in, and per meaning house. As you see, there is no verb here. And what we do when we translate it into English is add our own. The verb is, to be. So the man is in the house. So there's no verb in the Egyptian, but when we translate it, we often have to add something like the verb to be to make it make sense. And that is it. That is the only thing that makes it different from our verbal statement of fact. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you don't miss out, and I'll see you next week for your lesson. Bye!